And I believe that we are live. It looks like it. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Okay, I see some highs. Hi, Ross. First to say hi. Nice to see you. Love to see where everybody is from. So feel free to post in the comments where you are located. Thank you so much for joining today. This is a collaboration between GDG Silicon Valley, which, by the way, DevFest is coming up. So if you have an interesting talk you want to give at DevFest, there will be an in-person one. So hit me up. You can tweet at me at Lady Leet, or you can email me Tracy at modern-web.org. And I'm happy to talk about your talks. GDG Silicon Valley is also looking for, oops, we lost Jordan again. GDG Silicon Valley is also looking for organizers. Ross, you're in Chapel Hill. That's nice. So GDG Triangle is also looking for organizers. So yeah, like if you're excited about organizing events and conferences, feel free to show up in my inbox. Also, this is basically Angular World Tour, and what we're doing is we're collaborating with the Angular team to bring amazing Angular speakers over to Angular Mountain View and Angular SF, hopefully soon in person once we can get things figured out with COVID. But before then, it's exciting for all of us to be here and do these amazing remote talks and kind of reviving the excitement of the Angular community. So super excited about that. Again, keep going ahead and posting where you all are coming from and everything like that. I wanted to introduce our two speakers today. So first speaker is Ankita, and she is currently in Austin. And you have a really funny bio, but she's basically struggling to survive aggressive heat and increase in rent prices. So sponsor her on GitHub. Just kidding. She's been a front-end engineer, and she's going to be doing an amazing talk today. So I'm really excited about your talk. Jordan as well. Jordan is a developer experience engineer at Cypress, and he's been awesome. These two will both be at NJConf, so you can definitely hit them up and hang out with them there. And he is also CEO and co-founder of a nonprofit called Dream On Global. So hit Jordan up. Jordan also is amazing because if you do want to work on a really cool project, I don't know if you're taking contributors, Jordan, but I assume you are, right? It's open source,
right? Of course. Right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're looking for a really cool open source project with a cause, definitely hit Jordan up. I've never heard good things about you. I've never heard anything but good things.
That's much better than the other one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and kick it off and get started. And Ankita, I'm going to give you the platform. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We see some folks from Nigeria as well. So thank you for joining us from all around the world.
All right. Sharing screen. Let me know when y'all can see it.
Here we go.
Okay, so hello everyone. I would be giving y'all some quick context or a quick talk about auxiliary routes. So just to introduce myself and share some 3 facts about me. Apart from my name, I'm Ankita. I am a principal software engineer with Dell SecureWorks. So if you are looking for a new position, hit me up because we are hiring Angular developers right now. And outside of work, I'm generally the software engineer in me is interested in all things Angular, human-computer interaction, and design. And the child in me is interested in outdoors, crafting, dark chocolates, and Disney, but in no particular order. All of these things are my favorites all the time. Now let's talk about auxiliary routes because that's why we're here. So, 3 fun facts about auxiliary routes. They were introduced at the end of beta phase of Angular. So I have lost sense of time. So however ever so long that was, that's when they were introduced. And they're also known as named routes because you have to have a name associated with them. And I can talk more about that. I will be talking more about that in a bit, but that if you haven't heard the name auxiliary routes, you might have heard the term named routes. It's one and the same thing. Also, the third and the most fun fact is that there is no documentation available on the actual doc site. I'm not sure why that is, but because there is no documentation available, there are very few people who use it. Or I also don't know if it's because very few people are aware about it or use it. That's why there's no documentation. Like I feel like it's a catch-22 situation. Whichever whichever scenario works to help you sleep better at night is the one. So and it's also known as the name route because it allows us to have several routes and each has its own unique name that we can use apart from our main route. And so to give you an example of a regular routing, just as a refresher, we all do this in our main app dot component template. We would have a header, nav or side nav or something, and then a footer and the routed outlet. That's where all of our app, that's where majority of our pages would live. That is the main portion of our app. And if you set it up right, you'll have a beautiful looking page. And the main section is where most of your majority of your content will live and will get updated every time you change the route. The router outlet essentially acts as a placeholder for the content that is being routed, whether it's just the feature being routed or child routes or however you have it set up. They're all going to end up in that placeholder that is the router outlet, and they're just always there. If you have something set up like this, which most of us have, like the header and footer and possibly the nav always stay in the outlet, the router outlet part gets updated based on the route that you navigate to. So for the simplest of the apps, this is what your basic route config would look like. It would have your main path that you would want to get redirected to, and then you would have a dashboard. This is just an example of a simple, say, a product site that has a dashboard and a store, and then you can also view product details and an ID. And you could do lazy loading or just howsoever you want to configure it, but that's the main point, that it's just whatever you set it up over here, that component is going to show up in the router outlet part that we saw earlier. So in named router outlets or auxiliary routes are very much similar to this, and they also have all of the benefits or the features that you have for regular outlets. Let's look at how they're set up first. So if you were to add an auxiliary route, this is how you would do it. Notice the outlet part. That specifies the details is the name of the named route or outlet. And so you would have your main router outlet, and then apart from that, you would have another additional one on your page that has a name details. And that's where the mapping happens between what you set up in your routing module file and your template file. That's the placeholder. And so this basically tells that wherever you see the name details for the router outlet, add the card component in that placeholder. and it does not concern itself with what goes on for any of the other routes in the main router outlet. So the URL routes combos can get a little funky with it. You can have, suppose you're on the dashboard, and your auxiliary route is the card component that you're trying to load. And I'll in a second it'll make more sense when you look at the code and the app, a live example for it basically. But when you set it up like that, the browser URL will have dashboard, and in the parentheses it would say details cart. And details is the name that you gave it, and cart is the route or the path that you are sending your component to. So you'll end up looking something like this in the browser. For if you go to another route, it will the details cart, that part would persist. And so you will go, instead of being dashboard and details card, it will become store and details card. And you can have IDs passed to it, and or query parameters passed to it, and it will still keep persisting. And essentially, all of the features that you have for your regular routes that you set up, like lazy loading or routes or nested routes or passing in query parameters, all of that you could do for your named routes or auxiliary routes also. It's just another way of showing additional data. So when would you want to do that? Some of the use cases that I have seen most common are, if you want to have a part of the app. So if you ever want to set these up for your app, you would essentially be setting an app within an app, or a part that is persistent no matter where else in the app you're navigating. So if you want to have some helpful documentation or some guides that the user can always have open as they're clicking through your app, and can like refer to, okay, what do I need to do again? Okay, I need to go here. And so they can keep referring to it. It's just always in there and will live in the auxiliary route part, and it will not get updated, or not, it will basically persist over other routes. And another example would be if you have a sidebar or a panel with details, and it just makes it easier to share. For example, you have a table with all the rows and columns, and if you just share that link as is, you won't, if you're sharing the URL, it doesn't show you the state at your one. Suppose you had a map accordion expanded, and you share that link. When you share that link, the other person is not going to have this exact same view that you had. It won't see that you had the accordion expanded view. So if you want to persist a view like that and add it, make it a part of your URL, that's how you would do it. You would have the details expanded, or the panel, or whatever user interface term you would want to call that view, or however you are displaying that view. If you're expanding a row to view the details, or if you're clicking on a link on the row and viewing a panel, it will get added to your URL. And then when you share it, the other person who views it, they will see the table, and they would see exactly where you were. So it can persist the exact view that you want to share, and that makes it a little simpler. Okay. And another common use case is when you have comparison modes that you want to show up. Suppose you're navigating through a list and you keep wanting to add it in a separate view, and then you go back and you view details. Okay, like save. It could be a cart. It could be like a collection of Airbnb listings that you want to end and compare, or iPhones that you're comparing and you want to have a compare. I mean, there are a million ways of doing everything, but this is one of the ways that you could do it, that you could have a separate route or a separate view that persists as you're jumping back and forth between different routes, and it's just there in a special placeholder that you've created for it with its named outlet. So basically, like I said, like any scenario which would require you to have the ability to share the view or have the ability to run maybe an app within an app, as you're navigating through your main app. I think now would be a good time for me to share my other screen. Let me try that so that I can share some code examples. Let me try this. Sorry. I want to. So I have an example, and I would be sharing the GitHub repo link for it also. If I can just get my monitors aligned. Share screen. Okay, so as you can see, I have these are all the regular in my app component. I have all the regular routes, and this is where the router outlet, all of the routing would happen. And this is my named route, which is the auxiliary route, and this is the component that I'm passing it to, outlet details. Another funky part about named outlets is uh, how you essentially assemble it or you create it. The syntax of it is a little alarming to say the least when you look at it, but I think it's a feature, not a bug. Basically, this is how you would be passing it. You would have outlets, details, and then you would be passing in the object. So superheroes is the route that I want to pass, and I'm just also passing an ID if I want to. um, Basically what I'm doing here in my app is that I have all these. This is John Papa's Tour of Heroes app that he has created for us. I just took it and I just added some examples to it. Nothing more fancy. I didn't update any of it. Just the part that has the examples for auxiliary routes. So it has, you can look at a hero and then suppose you want to see its superpowers. Oh, of course, I changed something and it's not showing up. Change something. There was like, I was trying to increase the font size and I think I did something earlier. Oh, this part. This is not what I want here. There you go. So it shows you the superheroes. And now, if you want to navigate away from it, notice how that part is persistent. Now, if you want to see, look at some other superheroes' powers, you can choose to keep adding it to the view. And so this is an example of how you can persist a view even though you're navigating through, and you can make it look more pretty. It could be a model with an overlay so that the user does not, if you don't want the user to have the ability to navigate between different routes, you could also avoid that. And to clear out the auxiliary route from your URL, you would just be passing the details to be null, the object to be null, and that's essentially how it would work. Now, if you look at the repo whenever you have time, I've added comments that help you understand the setup of it all. There is no way programmatically that you can, if the auxiliary route is already loaded and you are navigating away from it, there is no way that it would go away. Like there's nothing that you can write an ng on it or something like that that destroy the auxiliary route upon navigation. The only way that I've found that you could do is that if I have, because in my routing modules app, if the path is empty, I'm redirecting it to the dashboard. So that's what I configured the router link to, and it allows for me to, whenever I click on the dashboard, to comment. So that's why whenever I click on the dashboard, it will clear out the auxiliary route from it. Just to show you what that looks like. Now that I click on dashboard, the URL got cleared. But this leverages the redirect strategy that we have here. If I had a third nav link and I wanted to do the same, that's kind of not possible. The only way that you can get rid of those is to have a clear button or a close button, essentially, and it relies on users action to perform the deliberate task of closing it, and not just, if they navigate away from, like, they want it to be intentional, that you really want to get rid of the move out from the auxiliary route, and not be stuck in it, basically. So yeah, I think that's the majority of what I wanted to show you. You could set up multiple things, multiple components, multiple routes to be looking at, to be hooked on to the details route. Now I don't have this built out, but suppose that there was comments. There was another component that was in this app called Mortal Enemy, and this, I could set it up so that it gets hooked on to the same named outlet when the path is something like this. So there are multiple things that you can do with it. And another good example is if you have a chat overlay that you want to persist in your app, even if the user is navigating through different routes, then you can just have a named router outlet called chat and hook on your component with it, and it will just persist. Let's see, did I have anything? If there are any questions or anything that you would want to see in the example, please do let me know. But yeah, this is all I had. And let me share the link again. Hold on, if I can find it.
Yeah, and then if you put it in the private chat too, I can go ahead and drop it in the YouTube comments so people can have it too.
Sorry, I am struggling to find my own talk. That happens. Okay. Wait, I stopped sharing now. Sometimes having 2 monitors is also too much. Okay, here's the link if you want to get a hang of the GitHub repo or the slides. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Love it. Everyone scan quickly. But yeah, post the if you want to post the direct link again, I can post it in the comments as well. So
okay, yeah.
Great, awesome. Next up, we have Jordan. Jordan is about to give us an amazing talk and drop some knowledge. So I'll let you share your screen really quickly.
Awesome.
Great.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, that was amazing, Ankita. Thank you for that. So today I'm going to give a quick talk on component testing with Cypress. historically, Cypress has been an end-to-end testing tool, but we recently, back in June, came out with our essentially released support for component testing as well. So today I'm going to give a talk about that. I hate talking about myself, but I'm Jordan Powell. I'm a developer experience engineer at Cypress. If you have any questions or want to connect with me, you can reach me on Twitter or GitHub at JordanPowell88, or at my blog, jordanpowell88.com. So today I'm just going to do a quick why component testing and then a demo. So whenever I do a talk, I feel like one of the the first questions I always like to answer is why, because like we're in a time where like there's infinite like choices for tools and technology, and so I feel like answering the why you should care about this up front is always like really important. So that's why we're going to first dive into why component testing. So the main reason why is because like when, if we go back like 5-10 years, we used to really think about, development. And even prior to that, like we used to develop websites and software basically from this notion of like a page. So you would like build a home page, an about page. And so like all of the code for that page essentially was kind of like encapsulated and isolated in the individual page. And there was obviously like, it worked, but we have somewhat, we've progressed as a front end technology and the way we kind of build apps. And so we've really progressed from like doing pages to components. And so the way we now think about our applications is not like this massive bucket of a page. It's now like, what are these individual like reusable potentially parts or components that we can then share throughout our application, or maybe throughout like multiple applications. And so there's a lot of advantages to components. One of my favorite things about like component testing is it really enforces like component driven development. And what I mean by that is, and the reason why we've gotten to component driven development is mostly through the acceleration and adoption of like component driven development frameworks like Angular, React, Vue, things like that. Those frameworks took a very deliberate Angular, or not Angular, but component centric approach to development. And the popularities of those frameworks then have really sort of increased the popularity of component driven development. Also, as time's grown on, we've created a lot of autonomous teams. So we have teams that are spread out and distributed all throughout the world. And so being able to work along with people all over in an autonomous fashion, components really helped encapsulate and solve a lot of the problems that we used to have without this. And kind of similar to this is we get this approach leads to more scalable code and less decoupled code, because once instead of thinking of everything as a page, essentially when we put it into components, we create like these little buckets, these little boundaries that enforce encapsulation of those codes, of that code. And it really decouples it, the components from each other that don't need to be, or code that doesn't need to be coupled together from each other. So obviously like being able to decouple our code is very important. Reuse and consistency is another big one. When we, the more we continue to improve and want to pump out software quicker and faster, the importance of being able to reuse code and be able to know that our code is going to be consistent, that is a very powerful tool in component driven development, enforces that. And ultimately improve maintainability. Obviously, we don't want to ship code faster if it just means we're implementing or introducing bugs faster into our code, you were really like walking backwards at that point. So improved maintainability in our code is obviously something that's important. So like the one of the other things I wanted to point out is with component testing, one of the things that is my favorite part about it is that you get documentation of of your components like for free out of the box. So what I mean by that is as you're testing your components and you're basically asserting the various behaviors that those components should uh, behave or interact with, you are essentially sort of not even meaning to, but you're providing documentation for future self or for other people on your team that says this component does X, Y, and Z. And I think that's very important and something we should, you know, embrace that. Hey, when we do component testing and as well as other forms of testing, we get documentation as sort of a side effect of that. Obviously, the main reason we write tests is for confidence because I like to sleep at night and I don't want phone calls from a boss at 3 a.m. saying, "Hey, our the thing you just did broke our website," or maybe it wasn't even something I did, maybe someone else on the team. Essentially, we want to make sure that when we ship code, we write code, we merge code, that we feel confident that it has a positive effect on our code and not a negative effect. The other thing specific to component testing is it really creates an isolation effect. So when you're the most actual beneficial time, in my opinion, for writing component testing is actually when you're creating the component itself. And what I mean by that is, if maybe you're new to an application and you don't know what the different parts do, well, opening up the component in Cypress and component testing, you can actually see exactly what the component looks like, all the different behaviors it has, all the things it does, and you get it in isolated fashion. So you don't have to navigate to this page, click this button, enter this form information just to get to the component you care about. And you don't have to worry about side effects of styles leaking into the component or some other component that's sort of conflicting with this component. Like you can see what this component looks like in isolation, which obviously has some benefits. And ultimately, we want to have an improved user experience. The code we write, we want to know that it is that's leading to improved experience of our users. Okay, so talk a little bit about test-driven development. This is like something I'm not necessarily a super big advocate for. I feel like it's kind of like one of those buzzwords that is overused, in my opinion, in testing. But there is certain benefits to it. But one of the things I would say about the component testing is that component testing sort of enforces TDD. And what I mean by that is if you do component testing from the very beginning or the creation of your component, you're actually like building your component side by side with Cypress. So you're like seeing your component take shape, building the styles, the different interactions, whether it be a click event, some directive, or some like Angular binding, all those types of things you're actually doing in sort of you're testing it as you're actually building it. And so I feel like component testing is one of the biggest use cases for TDD. So again, kind of to just hit what I was just mentioning is, again, like instead of like caring about one specific thing on your page, you would have to look at the entire page, where it's like really you only care about this specific thing. And so you can really like narrow down your focus. And someone who gets distracted easily, I find this like really helpful. And then another thing I want to highlight is that at Cypress, one of the things we always talk about is this notion of shifting left. And the idea of this is essentially like historically the way we talked about building software was sort of this diagram where we would first gather system requirements. We would then from there build software requirements, then do some sort of analysis. Then we would basically do like a program design. Then we would begin, once we had a design, we would begin writing code. And then after we had finished our coding, we would then begin doing testing. And then once our testing was complete, we would then essentially ship to production and make our code operational. Well, that was great, but really in this diagram, testing is like the very last thing that gets done. And what happens is because of that, oftentimes things we could have caught much earlier in the process are not caught until the end, and oftentimes those things could be like very costly to your organization, could be something that costs a lot of time, a lot of money. And it's also one of those things where we've all been in a place where we've been up against a tight deadline, and maybe testing is just one of those things where like, well, we don't have time to write tests because we have to hit our deadline, so we're going to make this operational. And essentially you just deployed code with like little to no test coverage. Well, the idea of shifting left is basically taking the notion of testing and moving it left on this diagram, shifting it left so that it really becomes something you think about from the very beginning. So you're thinking about what are you going to test in the system requirements stage, the software requirements stage, the analysis stage, and so forth. So now that we know like a little bit more about the why, I want to talk quickly about what are the differences between end-to-end and component testing, because Cypress has historically been known as an end-to-end framework. Component testing is one of those things that is a little bit different, and there are similarities. I'm gonna just scroll through this quick. So the one main benefit for end-to-end testing is that you ensure your app is functioning as a cohesive whole. Your tests match your user experience, and they can be written by developers or QA teams, and that they can be used for integration testing as well. So those are like some of the main benefits. Some considerations are that they could be more difficult to set up, run, and maintain. The provision testing infrastructure and CI could take some time, and testing certain scenarios require more setup than others. Common scenarios for when you want to do end-to-end testing are validating like critical workflows in your application, authentication, purchasing, basically the things that make your company money, or the things that would stop your company or your app from making money. You want to make sure those things work, and those are great scenarios for end-to-end testing. Ensuring data is persisted and displayed through multiple screens, running smoke tests, some checks, things like that. So component testing is really it's kind of similar to end-to-end testing, but we're really isolating our focus on components. So the benefits of component testing is that it's easier to test components in isolation. They're fast and reliable. Obviously, we like fast and reliable tests. They're easy to set up specific scenarios in our test, and they don't rely on external systems to run. So similar to like a unit test, that's sort of like a singular input, singular output. So they don't have dependencies on other things. Something to consider is that they do not ensure overall app quality, because it's only testing individual components, and you can have great components, but if they don't play nicely with the other components in your application, you basically have great components that don't play nice, and not a very effective application. They do not call external APIs or services, again, because we don't want to rely on external systems to run them. And these are usually written by developers, because components are sort of an implementation detail of being a developer. QA folks who write end-to-end tests don't care about the framework, don't care about how your app was written. They just care about what it looks like when it gets compiled and shipped to the browser. Or component testing, you're testing the component directly. And so the specific details of the component are relevant. Okay, so common scenarios: testing a date picker that it works in different scenarios, a form shows and hides specific values based upon input, testing components out of a design system, so on and so forth. So here's a quick comparison between them. I'm going super quick, but I want to just get through this real quick. One of the main things I want to highlight is the last row here, and that the thing that initializes an N10 test is visiting a URL. So like the thing that triggers or starts a N10 test is you visiting your URL, going back to Ankita, like she's talking about routes, visiting a route on your website. That is the initialization of your test. With component testing, you're not, it has nothing to do with a route, has everything to do with a component. So the initialization of component testing is what we call our mount command, which is basically mounting your component to your, like to the DOM essentially. So from site visit to mount. The other thing is what you test is going to be different. With end-to-end testing, you're used to, you would test like a user journey. So a user searches for a product, they add it to the shopping cart, they enter the shipping information, they pay, enter their payment information, they complete their order. Like you want to make sure that all those parts work seamlessly together, so that way a user can complete their journey from searching to a product to purchasing the product. With end-to-end testing, that's not the case. You're going to test individual components. So the search bar itself, the shopping cart button, the shipping form, the payment form, the order summary. You get the point, right? So, so how do you like get started with component testing? The first thing you do is npm install Cypress at latest-d. And as of would have been 2 days ago, we released Cypress 10.5, which added support for component testing for Angular, which is a feature many of you have been asking for a while. It's a feature that I worked very closely on, and I'm excited for the Angular community to have component testing because it's significantly better ergonomics, less code, more fun than writing tests with Karma, in my opinion. And I think you're going to like it a lot better. So this is what it looks like when you launch Cypress in 10.0 or greater. It's going to give you, basically ask you if you want to do end-to-end testing or component testing, and go from there. Here's a migration guide that if you're on a previous version of Cypress and you want to upgrade, there's some breaking changes from 9 and older to 10. I have a migration guide that I'm happy to share with anyone who maybe would have questions with that. And then let me do a quick demo, just show you guys what it's like. I hope you guys are going to be as excited about it as I am. So let me stop sharing and share a new screen. And this is what component testing looks like. Okay, so like I mentioned before, you're still going to use the same like describe and it syntax, the same way you're writing codes currently. The difference is this initialization command. So we have mount, like, you know, we're mounting the component instead of visiting it. And there's a couple ways you can write component tests. So my preferred way is the class syntax. So you literally just pass in the component class, and then it takes in an optional parameter. So for instance, if this component had no dependencies on no child components, no providers, no shared modules, anything like that, all you would need to do is you would just mount the component like this, and that's all you need to do to get up and running with component testing. This specific example has, I wanted to show you, has relies upon a module. So what mount has is a second argument that you pass it, and it's a mount config, and it basically extends the Angular test bed, the test bed module that has like your imports, providers. So if you could see here, I could add providers, I could add declarations, have imports, and then we added this this thing called component properties, which is basically a way for you to essentially like pass in props for your component. So this component, if we open it up, it looks like this, where there's some input properties where it's an avatar component, and by default it's going to be size 12, but it could have there's some additional configurations you could provide it. So in this case, I wanted to give it a URL so it actually like displays on the page. But see here, you could see you get type ahead. You can say, okay, well, these are component properties. Basically, any public property or method inside of the class you can reference. So here I'm passing a URL, giving it a size in this instance, and then I'm basically checking. After you mount it, you do your same Cypress commands and API you've been working with. You want to make sure it equals 128 pixels, that type of thing. So as you can see, it's basically very, very similar to, it's almost identical at how we have done end-to-end testing in the past. The only difference is that we're mounting a component instead of visiting it. The other thing I want to mention is that it also supports an optional like template syntax. So you could do like app avatar. I don't even know what this thing is called, JAvatar. So you take your selector, and so you could do like this, and then you could basically like use your template syntax here, and you could pass in like size equals 128, things like this, and this would work, right? And so pretty cool that you can also pass in you can use this syntax if you prefer it as well. The only caveat I will mention with this is that with the class using the class syntax, under the cover we're using the Angular's testbed, and so we normally, like in Karma, you have to declare the component itself in the declarations array. We are actually doing that for you, so that's why on a very like simple component, you actually like don't have to do anything other than this. Like a simple component just works like this, instead of the whole setting up the test bed and configuring it and all that stuff. We do that like under the covers for you. But when you pass it this template string, we can infer the type of component that you're passing us, because it's just a string. So you have to, in these cases, you have to give it a declaration of like avatar component, and then this would compile and run this test exact same way it would before. The other final thing I want to mention is that if this does support standalone components as well, so it works for Angular 13 and 14, and the only difference with standalone versus non-standalone, I don't know what we call like legacy Angular. I don't know if it's even legacy, but standalone and non-standalone components is basically you instead of like declaring a standalone component, you would just import it the way you'd normally like would test it in Angular. So that's a quick example of how you go about writing tests. Again, some more examples. But the cool thing is you can really get great feedback when you actually run it in your browser. And I don't know. I think you guys should try it out. You'll love it. I really wish when I was doing Angular development every day, I had this tool. So I'm like kind of jealous, even though I helped to build it. I like excited to find opportunities to build, like actually use this tool. So. I think you're muted, Tracy.
Oh, I said amazing. Okay, so you're speaking at NGConf about Cypress too, right? Is that right?
Correct. So I will be doing a talk with Eli Lucas, and we're going to be doing a workshop on how to convert your applications from Protractor to Cypress, which is obviously a kind of a big pain point for any users using that now. So we have a tool that helps migrate people, and basically you give it the Protractor code and it spits out the Cypress code equivalent. So really cool tool and a schematic, and then going to kind of deep dive into. It's kind of like all things testing Angular with Cypress. So
yeah, love it. Okay, well, awesome. Well, definitely check out both Ankita and Jordan on Twitter. You can follow them there. I feel like this was such an action-packed 50 minutes. So hopefully you all had fun again during your afternoon break / lunch / dinner. Since we have so many folks joining us from everywhere. We are doing these monthly. So we do have September lined up for Angular World Tour, visiting Angular, MTV, and SF, / GDG, Modern Web, and all those other fun meetups. Keep a lookout as well for DevFest, Google developer groups in your specific area, since we're not talking about just Bay Area people here. Google developer group is your local Google developer group should be hosting a DevFest coming up soon. So that should be an action-packed conference, and we will be hosting one in the Bay Area, just trying to figure out dates and everything like that. So keep a lookout. All right. Well, again, we are also looking for organizers for these local meetups. So Ross, I already sent you my email address. I'll say it again. It's tracy@modern-web.org. If you are looking to organize a local GDG or become an organizer, don't start your own meetup. Help the meetups that are currently existing. And yeah, Ankita, Jordan, have fun at NJConf, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks for joining all.
I had a great time. Thank you.